Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach. So, controversial opinion. Did Pharaoh have it right? Work with me here, right? Okay, go back to the time, right? Joseph has passed away, and the Israelites, not yet named that, the family of Jacob is there, and they're getting quite numerous. And what is Pharaoh's concern about this foreign population within his borders? Come on, we've read the story, right? That they're going to take over. At the very least, they'll join with a foreign enemy and become some kind of fifth column, additional troops, somehow cause the downfall of the Egyptian empire. And his solution is, well, he doesn't want to get rid of the labor, is to cull them, right? To famously murder the boys, which is how Moses ends up in the basket, yada, yada. We get the story of the Exodus. And what happens at the end of the story of the Exodus that we just heard in the beautiful reading of Shirat Hayam by Mr. Fruchter? What's the result for Egypt? Their armies destroyed. And Pharaoh is slain. Just like he worried about. He was right. We did end up tearing down Egypt. He thought we might eventually rise up and cause the destruction of Egyptian might. And eventually we rose up and caused the destruction of the Egyptian might. So, therefore, the lesson that we must learn when we are learning the story of the Exodus is, well, what does the Torah say is the lesson? You were strangers in a strange land and caused their downfall. Therefore, how do we treat strangers? What's that? With respect? With kindness? Were we not paying attention to what we just did to Egypt? Why would we not think someone else might do that to us? We were the group that were infiltrating the Egyptian world and tore it down with our mighty God. Why are we not afraid that other strangers will do the same to us? The Torah should have said, beware of strangers, because you were strangers in Egypt, and look what happened to them. Instead, the Torah says, you will treat strangers well. You will love them. You will not oppress them. There will be one law for you and for them because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. It's drawing the wrong conclusion if you were in the realpolitik mindset. It's drawing the wrong conclusion, but of course, it's God, so we know this conclusion is right. Because Judaism goes on to formalize this more than just flowery statement in our actual practices. Let's do one that might be near and dear to everybody's heart. One place where there might still be some ambiguity. It comes time for Pesach, and you have a non-Jewish friend. Are you allowed to invite them to your Seder? I hear yeses. But were you not reading last week when we said that a non-Jew cannot partake of the Seder sacrifice?
But it's not an official sacrifice anymore.
But since the destruction of the temple and the altar of Jerusalem by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago, it ain't a sacrifice anymore, right? Specifically, we've got that bone on the plate to remind us that it's not a sacrifice. Significantly, when we eat our korech, our sandwich of the maror and the matzah, we explicitly do not have meat on it because the only meat that would go with it would be the meat of the sacrifice. So, yes, for this one element, if we were still doing sacrifices, a non-Jew would not be invited. However, we're not doing sacrifices. Have all the non-Jews you want at your Seder. It's a wonderful thing. But what about other aspects? If you were in the ancient world and the altar was still standing, a non-Jew couldn't come to eat that Passover sacrifice, but could they bring their own sacrifice? Could a non-Jew go up to the temple and say, I would like to celebrate Adonai, and I would like a sheep to be sacrificed in honor of God on my behalf. Now, they're not going to be performing the sacrifice, don't get me wrong, just like the regular Israelites weren't doing it, only the Kohanim appointed and trained at that time. But could they designate a sacrifice and have it sacrificed on their behalf to God? Again, we're not talking about them sacrificing using our temple to their gods. Their sacrifice on their behalf to our God, is it allowed? I see people shaking their head, and you're wrong. Because absolutely it was allowed. And we know it was allowed not just because Jewish law says it explicitly, but we know it was allowed not just because the prophets foretell that other people will want to come and worship at our place, but we know that this is actually one of the issues that caused, at least according to one telling in the Talmud, the destruction of the Second Temple. Because a Jewish guy, bad-mouthing another Jewish guy, decided to get revenge on all of the Jews, because that's how we escalate things apparently, by convincing the Romans to send a sacrifice like they had been doing, that would be sacrificed at the temple on behalf of the Roman Empire, but he would make a blemish in it that we would consider disqualifying and that Rome wouldn't. And that would then precipitate us refusing to do a sacrifice on behalf of Rome, which would cause, well, the eventual revolt and the destruction of the Second Temple. Yeah, when Jews plot revenge, we plot big. And that's indeed exactly what happened. But the sacrifices happened as normal, under normal circumstances, without the vengeance-seeking going on. It was perfectly fine for them to sacrifice at our temple, again, to designate a sacrifice. They were not doing any of the work, but to be part of that service. Could a non-Jew open up a business in the land of Israel in ancient times? Was that allowed? Yes. Yeah. And were you allowed to use fake weights and measures when you were working with the non-Jew? No. Why not? Because the Torah says at least 5 times, more depending upon how you count, there will be one law for you and the stranger among you. And we don't get to have a double standard when it comes to how we treat the non-native born that happens to be living within our borders. Why not? Because we were in Egypt, and we know what that's like. Rather than teaching us to be hard, rather than teaching us to be cruel, our experience in Egypt, the Torah tells us, is meant to teach us to have sympathy, to have empathy, and most importantly, to have consistency. That there will be one law. That is a bedrock of Torah. Now, one law doesn't mean everybody gets treated the same. Murderers get treated differently than thieves, and thieves get treated differently than someone who cheats at business. That's not what one law means. But it means that if you are accused of murder or theft, or if you are accused of some other cheating practice, you will have your trial. You will have the case be heard according to the standards of evidence and testimony and all of the other particulars of Jewish law. And that will happen whether you are Jewish or whether you are not Jewish. You're going to the Beit Din, and the Beit Din is going to hear your testimony. Because the Torah told us to. But why did the Torah tell us to? Is it just a matter of sympathy? Is it just a matter of empathy? Was the Torah just trying to make us feel warm and squishy towards other people because Pharaoh had treated us so badly and we wouldn't want to do that? No. Because the Torah knew that if we allowed ourselves to have a double standard for anyone within our community, if we allowed ourselves to get into the habit of cheating the stranger or of lynching the stranger because they don't deserve a trial, they don't deserve to go through the court process, that we could eventually turn that same logic upon ourselves. And indeed, we have. We continue to argue all the way up until the present day in 2025. One of the reasons why the Merkaz election, materials in the lobby, is so important right now. We continue to argue about who is a real Jew. And we continue to argue that not just about who gets to have an aliyah at whatever synagogue, but we argue about that because of the real consequences regarding funding, regarding legal status, and regarding participation in the broader Jewish life, outside of just your own synagogue, but as a Jew in the community. And many people will disqualify other people as not being the right kind of Jew, and therefore not having a seat at the table. We have seen this play out. As soon as you begin to have a double standard, as soon as you say the laws apply only to some people but not other people, and I get to decide who those people are based upon my affinity with them, based upon my agreement with them, based upon a shared ideological framework, as soon as you say that, then you have destroyed the entire purpose of Torah. If the Torah was not there to give some an advantage over others, it was not there to lift up some so that they get to be the oppressors now, unlike the Egyptians. It wasn't about role reversal, it was about changing the narrative completely. We've talked about this before. The Torah was not there to put us at a better seat at the table, it was to flip the table, because the game that humanity had been playing, and unfortunately by and large continues to play, is corrupt and wrong. And we have to at least learn to play the game amongst ourselves correctly, according to one rule book, sitting in multiple copies in the ark behind me. And that rule book couldn't only be for us, but in our communities, where we did have authority to adjudicate for brief periods at different times in our history, those rules had to be applied consistently, whether the person that was under question was Jewish or not Jewish. Because, as history showed us, as soon as we were willing to take that off the table, the knives came out and we pointed them at each other as well. And we should do it for the warm, fuzzy feelings of we had been slaves and no one should be oppressed. We had been discriminated against by Pharaoh and no one should face that. That we only rose up against Pharaoh because we had been so brutally mistreated, and we would have been perfectly happy to have found other ways of compromise with Pharaoh to allay his fears, but we were not given that choice. We were not given that chance. Yeah, all of those other things are true. But ultimately, even if you're not moved by the emotion the Torah asks us to have, even if you're not moved by the inspiration of the failures of Pharaoh to try and do better rather than repeat his mistakes, at least you can understand that when we undermine this singular Torah, when we have one Torah for us and one Torah for others, one rules for us, one rules for others, that as soon as you create that bifurcation of an us and other, any one of us could be pushed into the category of other at any moment. As Jews, we have seen this happen again and again. We have been part of us in many parts of Europe, comfortably settling down, whether it be France or Germany or England, only to find that we are now othered and either discriminated against or kicked out of the country altogether. In Germany, we had begun to become accepted legally in many ways. We had become integrated in many parts of German society. We were part of the us. Jews fought in the trenches on behalf of the Kaiser during World War I, proudly fighting on behalf of Deutschland. And yet, how quickly did they become othered within a decade? By millions to their slaughter. When we allow there to be an us and a them, an us and an other, and the rules that protect only protect us, and the rules that control only control them, then we as Jews in particular should feel our Jewish antenna flashing red alert. Because we have been there before on the receiving end. And when it is recreated, we know that it will eventually come for us. Again, I'd rather we were all moved by the inspiration that the Torah gives us. I'd rather we were all moved by the spiritual lesson that God has been screaming for us. But if you can't be moved by that, be moved by self-interest. For yourself, for your family, for your children, for your grandchildren, for the Jews at large. Because we must always be the guardians of this. It is one of the responsibilities we have of having endured the brutality of Egypt and having been liberated. God set us free not just so we could disappear into history, but so that we would shape it. And this is one of the main places where that shaping must happen. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.